You ever think about how a forgotten mascot like this was made as an honest attempt to be the next big gaming mascot? Of course you don't. It's forgotten. Society would crumble if this thing would arise to any sort of power. Video game mascots are a tricky thing to get right, but, that hasn't stopped many companies from trying for better or for far, far worse. When a mascot does end up working out though, just that character can carry a whole franchise, hell even a whole company on their back if they're popular enough. I mean, just think about it. Designing a character to put on advertisements is a whole lot more effective than just putting your Uncle Greg on a billboard and hoping people buy the game. Just the small change of putting an appealing and recognizable mascot on a product can make it sell a whole lot better. For example, it's fine, I guess. Just flour. Who cares? I love flour! The problem is, it's really hard to make an effective mascot that can appeal to so many different people at once. And as you'd expect, there's a massive graveyard of failed and forgotten video game mascots throughout history. So I figured, why not go through and exhume some of these corpses? Listen, I know I'm bound to get cursed one of these days, so I might as well have it be by the vengeful spirit of a sentient and violent pencil. When it comes to iconic video game mascots, you probably think of characters like Mario and Sonic, easily some of the most popular and recognizable characters in the whole video game space. There's a reason why old people call any technology on par with a calculator that they don't recognize a Nintendo. And even though they may have started the whole flood of awful mascot games on the SNES and Genesis, there were still plenty of mascot games before then. I'm sure there were some great characters on the old generations of video game consoles, like who could forget such long-standing mascots like... Okay, never mind. Yeah, so back in the first couple generations of video game consoles, there weren't many attempts to make recognizable main characters on account of how the best they could do at the time was... kidney stone inducing. Most old video game mascots appeared in arcades at the time, characters like Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, Dig Dug, and many more, but it would take a while for those efforts to make their way back onto home consoles like how Mario did with the NES. So of course, when that paid off for Nintendo, other companies started to take notice and started concocting their own nightmare of a mascot in an attempt to do the same. So by the time the SNES rolled around, there was a whole host of shovelware to wade through. Not all of them are relegated to instant obscurity though. Take Bubsy for instance, who is definitely one of the better failed attempts at this whole mascot thing. Yeah, that's right. The peak for mascots in this video is Bubsy. It's only downhill from here. Panic accordingly. To be fair, I don't even know if I can really call Bubsy a failed mascot. After all, he is still remembered by quite a few people and ended up getting a total of 6 different games. He had to have been quite good to get a whole series like that. I blinked. What? So, even though Bubsy did get a bunch of games, he has quite the shaky track record in terms of his game's quality. But, hey, just look at him. If that's not a face you can trust, then I don't know what is. Personally, when I see this man, I have a lot of trust that he will end up on the FBI's most wanted list. The first couple Bubsy games were received pretty positively upon their release, but not quite up to the quality of the next big gaming mascot that he was being hyped up as at the time. That sort of ended up continuing with every game progressively getting worse and worse reviews, ending with the affront to God that is Bubsy 3D. For a while after that, the series seemed pretty dead as there were no new games for 21 years, but just like any good stomach ulcer, he came back to torment us after we thought he was finally gone. Bubsy The Woolly Strikes Back and Bubsy Paws on Fire were 2 games released in 2017 and 2019 respectively. Looks like my prediction came true. These games were both received pretty badly, especially The Woolly Strikes Back. This is why I'm not really even sure if Bubsy can be considered a failed mascot. He has stood the test of time to a certain degree and does have a generally pretty good design. However, for how he is being hyped up to rival Mario and Sonic and the awful quality of most of the games, he definitely seems like a pretty failed mascot. But is he better than a pencil? Okay, I mentioned this thing earlier, but come on, how bad could it really be?
Whoa, big fella! You got a name, Leadhead? Call me Woody. Wild Woody! Being a jet, oh boy, it's time to start sketching! Yahoo!
Yeah, no, I'd rather not see anything like that ever again, thanks. Wild Woody was a game that released for the Sega CD in 1995 and is probably the cause of at least one kid's deep-rooted trauma. I could, talk about how awful the game itself is, the poor controls, the main mechanics just not being fun to use, and the weird as hell soundtrack, but why do that when this exists? I just have to talk about this absolute nightmare of an opening cutscene. How the hell did this even happen? They somehow made an entire finished cutscene look like one massive graphical error. The Wikipedia page for this game says the animations for Wild Woody and the cutscenes were motion captured by Donald Hom. Do you think he put that on his resume? I will give it this though, it is quite expressive, especially for its time. I can really feel all the emotions that the animators put into the scene, like fear, anxiety, anguish, malice, trantiveness, humber, deluge. It just really makes you feel. To be perfectly honest though, beyond that, there isn't really much to say about this game. Although I feel like I should at least touch on the weird boss fights in the game. In World 1, you fight against a skeleton pirate dude, okay? And the music is really something. And then in World 2, he's fighting Zeus? Listen, I was not lying earlier when I said that society would be in shambles if this thing rose to any sort of power. Well, let's just move on, though. I'm starting to feel a little concerned for my well-being after talking about this thing for so long. The game itself just isn't really fun, it was poorly received, and is really only memorable for the animation. Wild Woody himself fails to be a mascot because he's just a damn pencil with a lust for blood, so naturally it's pretty safe to consider him a failed mascot. But hey, what's next? After a pencil with just legs, arms, and a face, I'm pretty sure any design will seem more creative. I put my eyes back in for this? Are you kidding me? Okay, to be fair, Glover is a far better designed character than Wild Woody. I personally just find the whole idea of a mascot being a normal thing with a face to be a little bit lazy. That being said, I do think Glover is actually kind of a decent character with a neat idea for gameplay. And that means a lot, coming from a glove hater like myself. The main gameplay involves controlling Glover to get a ball to the end of the stage using his incredible superpower of having fingers. If that's really all it takes to be a superhero, then I'm still waiting on my award. It's simple in concept, but from what I can tell, it seems pretty fun given that it got pretty positive reviews and a port to modern consoles. Because why play a modern AAA game when you can finally fulfill your lifelong dream of becoming a glove? All things considered, this was definitely one of the better attempts at a new mascot. He's got a nice and simple design, the game is generally pretty fun, and you get to play as a sentient article of clothing. What more could you ask for? But if all that's true, then why didn't we get a sequel to Glover? Seems like that would have been the obvious choice at the time. Oh well, it's actually quite simple. The sequel canceled development when it was almost done because some f***ing intern they put in charge of ordering the cartridges accidentally ordered 300,000 instead of 150,000. They had far more Glover than any mortal could possibly handle. It's a miracle the developers didn't all die of a Glover overdose at the time. They just couldn't get the retailers at the time to take all those extra copies, so the financial loss had them pull the plug on the sequel. Alright, so far we have one mascot that had some success but faded to obscurity after all his games were nauseating at best, one that I would not let my non-existent kids get anywhere near, and an overall pretty good one that was killed by a misclick. What's next? The marketing team sure was working overtime for that one. Okay, so Captain Novolin for the SNES is probably the one that had the best intentions out of all of these. I initially wasn't going to include this here, but I figured I had to at least bring this up because it is really bizarre. Captain Novolin was a game that was made to teach children how to manage their diabetes in a fun way. Turns out, it's not exactly easy to make something like diabetes fun, but hey, I appreciate the effort. I don't even really want to make fun of this one too much because it was a pretty well-mannered game, but that's not going to stop me from saying that this game plays like absolute shit. It's just straight up not fun to play, which makes it kind of hard for kids to want to come back and, learn. Making an edutainment game that is both fun and effective is really hard, given that the last thing kids want to do after getting home from school is be forced to learn even more. It also doesn't help when the main threat to the superhero you play is sentient sugar snacks. To be fair, if I was playing this as a kid and this is what I saw chocolate chip cookies as, I would probably be pretty afraid of them as well. So maybe it succeeded on that front. That's right, folks. When you can't teach kids about the horrors of sugar, just put the fear of God into them by throwing throwing anthropomorphic disgusting cookies at them, and they'll handle it fine later in life, I guarantee it. Like I said, I applaud the effort on this one, but it failed on pretty much every front of being an actually good edutainment game. I could go on and on about so many other similar mascot attempts throughout the years, but I'm pretty sure by this point that you probably get the idea. Making a good mascot is really hard work. It has to appeal to so many different people simultaneously, has to be easily recognizable, has to not be a fucking pencil. It's really hard to do all those things at once. But I think I've got it figured out. Sure, all these mascots on their own may have been horrendous failures, but if I pool all their strength, I think they could become the greatest mascot in video game history. Alright, so I think after channeling my inner Dr. Frankenstein, I've really got this figured out. I mean, come on. Would you trust this man around your kids?